All right, this lesson is on how to draw in Flash and convert your drawings into library symbols that you can later access as you put together your animation. This is actually, the interface we're looking at is in CC. Drawing with Flash, there's several ways that you can do it. You'll actually probably recognize some of these tools like the pen tools, the shapes, the brushes. Some of them work similarly and some of them work differently, and that's probably going to be one of the frustrations you encounter is that you're going to expect them to work like they do either in Illustrator or Photoshop, but they have some slight variations, so bear with it. It's just part of the way that the program works. I'm going to go through and show you some of the basics, and of course you can go in there and experiment on your own a little bit and see kind of what works for you. All right. In terms of which tools that you use, I'm going to actually recommend that you use this brush tool. The brush tool actually works more like the blob tool does in Illustrator, so it might get a little bit confusing, but we're going to go over some of that. One of the most important things that you want to remember when you're drawing using this brush tool in Flash is that there's this thing called object modes. So if you go down here, it says object drawing mode. By default, it's already selected. You can tell because it's kind of a dark color over it, okay? We want to make sure that's selected so that when you create a shape, you'll know it's in drawing mode if by default it creates that bounding box once you release, okay? You want that as opposed to, I'm going to click to deselect it. Notice there's no little highlighted rectangle around it. See, that's when it's selected. That's when it's not selected, okay? And even though these will look the same, it will be different, okay? When I select this one, there's a bounding box around it. That's what you want to make sure you have. This here, you'll notice these little dots. I'll zoom in so you can see. These little dots, and these little dots, what they are, it means that it's in this pure kind of raw state. What happens is that if you draw two items on top of each other that are in this pure state, they interact and they kind of affect each other in a way that you probably don't want to happen, okay? So to illustrate that, I'm going to go ahead and click off of it, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and create another item. I'm going to change the color just so that you can see what happens. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another item just with my brush tool here. I'm going to go like this. Okay, and now I'm going to grab my black arrow, and these again are not in object mode. This is not the way you want to work. I'm going to go ahead and try to move it. I'm going to select it first, okay, and then I'm going to move it. And what you'll notice is that it just cut through where it was existing. So basically anything that's a different color will cut through. Anything that's the exact same color, so if I go and I grab the red, the brush here, and then I select the color that was there before here, and I draw it here, and I go like this. When I go with my black arrow to select it, notice it becomes all part of that. See how it all groups with those little dots there? It becomes part of the same thing. So this isn't good because when you're trying to do an animation like a guy with an arm swinging and you want to be able to move this part separately, you don't want that to happen, okay? Because then things start tangling up and grouping together or ungrouping, and there's no real way to then separate them other than manually cutting them apart using your lasso tool, okay? So for this one here, because it's in object mode, if I go and I create an identical color, a similar shape or whatever, as long as this is object mode is on here, and I go and I create another one, all right, it works like Illustrator where it remembers, you know, that it's its own object and you can move it separately, okay? And then if this was an animation and I wanted it to swing back and forth, it wouldn't manipulate what's underneath it, okay? So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that you remember. That's the most important thing. By default, drawing mode in object mode here will be selected, but sometimes by accident you might unclick it, or if you're using a later version of the program, it might not be by default on. So that's something you want to remember to learn to do, and to just remember that, to check it that it's selected, okay? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm just going to show you some of the other features, okay? I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush tool again. I'm going to create a shape, okay? And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to remove the outline color, okay? There's no outline there. All right. What I want to show you is that it might get a little confusing because actually when you draw, what it remembers is the fill color. That's how it's like the blob tool. You would think that looks like an outline. Oh, it's probably the outline, but that's actually not the case. The fill color here, it kind of draws in this blob mode. So if I change the fill color, it'll change the actual line. But if I add an outline, just here, color, it'll create, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, it'll create an outline around it, okay? And where you control this is if you want to control the color, you can control it here. Or you can also control it over here in the Properties palette. To get this Properties palette, if it's not up, you go to Window, Properties, okay? So then you have the ability to go in here and change either the color here. You can select it to no stroke, or you can add a different color stroke. You can change the size of it to make it bigger, and it's just, at some point it makes it disappear because the inside color is small, but you can make it thinner, you can make it larger. Okay, and you can just experiment with some of these like solid and dashed line if you wanted to. You can't really see it because it's not big enough, but you get there's the dotted line, okay? So you can experiment with some of those. And then some of these other settings just to see what kind of they do and stuff like that. Okay, the scaling, horizontal, you can make it like thicker on one side or the other or whatever. But basically those are some of your options, okay? In terms of color, your color options are found here. You can go in here again and change your fill and your colors. Here's a solid when it gives you this format of selecting color. You can also go in here and change your gradients, radio. So these are where these options are found. And there's another video on this page that deals with that. So you can go ahead and look more about color, you know, when you're starting to want to do gradients and that type of stuff. All right, so I won't go over that too much. Now just to show you just how you would draw and create a symbol, you could, okay. Now these lines, like I said, you have the option to go in here and you can actually grab your white arrow and you can still modify things here. So you can get the points to pull up. So you could modify that kind of like you do in Illustrator. You could also manipulate this way, you know, that way, you know, so you have the little handles and all of that. Okay. If I go back to my black arrow, you have this basic way of just going up to the line. You see that little curved line indicator there? You can actually grab it and do that without even selecting the point. So that's another thing. Okay. You can do that both when it's in raw state and in this object mode. Okay. Basically grabs, there's some points here where it was squared off and that's why it does that. I'll just undo. Okay. So there's some manipulations that you can make here. All right. Within your pen tool here, if you did want to add some points, you could add points if you wanted to. You just need to make sure that your object is selected in that mode. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this so you can see it. So you can see the outlines. You can go grab your pen. Now you can do it. All right. So that then you can further manipulate these. Okay. So you have those tools available to you. Then, of course, you have things like your shapes and your lines and your text tool and whatnot, your pencil, okay? I'm going to go ahead and grab this and I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to create a quick little guy so that you know how, after you're done doing your drawings, how to convert them into symbols, okay? And so my drawing is not going to look that great. Your drawing should look better, okay? I'm going to go ahead and create a guy here. I'm going to up his outline. Okay, and that's one thing for this project. I'm not going to be as particular in terms of setting the requirement whether or not you can use outlines or not. As long as visually they work, I won't give you feedback to change it, okay? Obviously, if the drawing doesn't look that great and it needs to improve visually, then I'll let you know, but it's not going to be a requirement of like absolutely no outlines, okay? Like Illustrator was, okay? This project, the focus is on drawing something that looks good, obviously, but on animating as well. So I'd rather you balance your time between those two mediums. Okay, so I'm going to set it. I'm going to actually manually type this in here. I'm going to bring it down to like a 3, okay? And of course your drawing would look better. I'm just going to use the shapes that I have. I'm going to actually change the colors here. I'm going to remove the outline on this one. All right, and I've removed it. And then I'm going to go ahead and create the other arm. And mine might not be equal. You probably want to make yours better. And see how I'm actually drawing these with the overlap? I want to have that overlap on these limbs here so that when they swing back and forth, if I decide to animate them, they don't come apart, you know, where the edges are and stuff. You just want them to have that overlap so you can't really see it. I'm actually going to remove all of these outlines here. I'm just selecting it. I'm holding down Shift to multiple select. I'm just going to go ahead and select no fill. Okay. If you wanted to add things like shading, you can also use your brush tool. You can change the size of this brush here. You can add more size to it, kind of like this here. Okay. And you could, in your properties palette, you could lower the opacity if you go into the color here. So you could change down the alpha. Okay. And you could select maybe a slightly different color blue or something. You could draw in some shading, you know. You get the idea. And if you overdrew too much here, you could always use there's an eraser tool here. And erase some of that. You just got to be careful not to erase on some of that other stuff there. Or if you double click this, see here how I'm inside this drawing object. It's in that kind of raw mode. In here, you could further delete in here. And this will only affect the actual object that you're trying to manipulate, not the other ones, okay, like the circle and stuff. But that's in this deeper level. You notice if we go in here, we're inside the drawing object mode. Once you're done editing that here, you can then step out by going back to the scene. And that way you have some shading, okay? Yours would look better than this. Mine was just a quick, just show you, okay? And that's using the opacity here, just a slightly different color, okay? Kind of like we did the shading in Illustrator, all right? Except for using the brush tool to create that. All right, now other things you can do. If you wanted to change the color of the head, you could just select it and you could go in here and you could change the color so you can make him a little more peachy. You can change the color of his outline. You can make it actually a orange, okay? You can also, what's kind of cool is say that you wanted to draw some hair behind his head or something on top of him. I'm going to show you these things called drawing mode. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush tool here. You can grab, I'm going to draw a hat on him. If I'm just in regular drawing object mode, I can create a hat for him. I create this going all the way down, all the way across, where everything kind of overlaps, just like an Illustrator. Then you can go in with your paint bucket tool and fill in the space as long as it's a closed shape. If you don't close it initially, show you here, and you leave it open and you can't fill it, just like we encountered, what you can do to close it is you can create another shape to close it, okay? But notice it still won't fill. Watch if we go in here, still won't fill. But what you can do is you can select this object, hold down Shift, select this other object, go to Modify, Combine, Union. Now they are one. Now if you grab your paint bucket tool, you can fill it, okay? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. All right, another thing is say that I wanna draw hair behind this object, okay? Behind this object here, I can go into my brush tool. Okay, I'm going to change the color of my, oops, I'm going to actually deselect because if I go in, I change the color right now, I'm going to actually change the color of my head. So I'm going to go to my arrow, I'm going to click off of it. I'm going to go and change my color to the color I want the hair. I'm going to hit like a brown here. I'm going to go to the paintbrush and I'm going to show you if I paint on top of this, it'll obviously just paint on top of this. Okay. And that's fine, you know, I could just push this into the back. I could arrange it to the back by going Object, Arrange, Send to the back. And you'll notice it's back here. And I can position it. Okay, that's one way. Another way is I can grab this brush. I can go into this Paint Behind mode. And then if I do this, it automatically pushes it behind. And it's automatically its own object here, okay? The only thing with this is that it does it in this mode, which we didn't really want to work with to begin with. So if you do have something in this mode, okay, what you can do is you can convert it into a drawn object mode. So what you would do is you would modify, combine object, and then do union. And that union also turns it in, but notice it brought it forward. You could just send it back. And you would go to Modify, Arrange, Send to Back. Okay? Or you could right-click, Arrange, Send to Back. Okay? So that's the basics. Okay? So once you're complete with him, once he has his eyes, his hair is perfectly combed and all that, you can go ahead and turn him into a symbol. And to do that, you'd want to make sure your library palette is up. You would want to go to Window, Library, make sure that that's selected. You can select the object. I just went with my black arrow, selected everything on it. Okay, if you have more than one object, you can click, hold down, shift, and select the individual parts. But I just drag across since it's the only object that's here. Right click, okay, or control click on a Mac so that you can get the right click option. And you can go into Convert to Symbol. Or for here, the shortcut is F8. Whatever it says in this little area here, that's your shortcut, okay, for your computer. Different laptops might be different. It might require you to hold down other keys. Okay, so F8. Or, to get that option as well, once it's selected, you can go to Modify, Convert to Symbol. And again, the shortcut for it is there, F8. Okay? This will pop up. Sometimes it'll pop up with this open advanced. Not, it might look like this. It might look like this. Okay? This will be the default anytime you're converting symbols. So sometimes you'll see it like that. Sometimes you'll see it like that. All right? Things that you want to remember is you want to always center the registration. The type, by default, you're going to always want to select graphic. At some point, I might tell you to select button when you're drawing your button or movie clip because we know we're going to do something special with it. But by default, graphic. If you don't set it to begin with, that's fine. You can still change it later on in your library and your property setting. But if you can start getting into the mode of doing everything in graphic, that'll be your best bet. Okay? And then you go ahead and you just name it here. Those are the only 3 settings you're going to change here. Is going to be name, the type, and the registration. And then you hit OK. And this is what your icon will look like. It'll have like these little shapes in there. And when you're done with it and you're ready to draw your next object, you can just delete it from the stage. It doesn't matter that it's deleted here. It's still stored here in your library, in your little treasure chest of characters and props and things that you're going to need for your animation. And then you would just continue drawing your next thing, whatever it is. And when you're done with it, select it and then modify, convert to symbol. And then just name it, change it to graphic here and registration in the center, and then hit OK. All right, this concludes your lesson on drawing and creating symbols. If you have any questions, please make sure to contact me.